You never expect the past to walk in right when you're feeling untouchable. Richard Hawthorne whispered to himself, adjusting his cufflinks as he led Sophia Bennett through the polished doors of La Fontaine, the city's most exclusive five-star restaurant, golden light bouncing off crystal chandeliers, the scent of fresh flowers and sizzling delicacies filling the air. Sophia's eyes sparkled, excitement mixed with a hint of nerves, and she reached for Richard's hand, her touch light but grounding. The maitre d' guided them to a private table near the window, offering a panoramic view of the skyline, and Richard's grin stretched wide, a mix of pride and the usual self-assured swagger that came with being the CEO of Hawthorne Industries. As menus were handed and the soft hum of conversation swirled around them, Richard's eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room without noticing the subtle change in the atmosphere. Then, the door opened again, and the light caught a figure standing just inside, a moment that made everything freeze. Emily Collins, his ex-wife, her posture straight, carrying herself with a quiet dignity, a small but unmistakable baby bump visible beneath her tailored coat. The world seemed to hush for a fraction of a second. Sophia's grip tightened on Richard's hand, sensing his momentary falter. Richard's jaw tensed, the words he had prepared for a charming evening slipping, replaced by a flicker of unease he wasn't used to. Emily's gaze met his, calm, confident, a subtle smile playing at her lips that neither mocked nor pleaded, merely existed with a sense of self-assurance Richard had long overlooked. The waiter approached, offering to take coats, but the room felt charged with tension, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Emily made her way to a nearby table, her movements composed, deliberate, each step measured, showing no rush, no apology, just presence. Richard, momentarily distracted, tried to regain control of his composure, his posture straightening, smile returning to his face for Sophia's benefit, yet there was a flicker in his eyes, a realization that tonight's evening might not unfold as he had imagined. He cleared his throat, attempting a joke, a quip about running into old acquaintances, but Emily's serene demeanor rendered it unnecessary, the calm strength she radiated filling the space between them far louder than words could. Sophia glanced at Emily, sensing the unspoken power in her quiet confidence, feeling a flutter of awe and curiosity, the kind that leaves a moment suspended in time. Richard reached for his wine glass, swirling the liquid, each movement deliberate, trying to anchor himself in familiarity, but his mind raced with memories, choices, and what it meant to see Emily not just surviving but thriving, carrying life forward while exuding grace under pressure. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflecting like tiny constellations, and inside, Richard's carefully curated world seemed just a little less predictable, a little more real, as Emily took her seat poised, ready for whatever conversation the evening would bring, and Richard realized, even in the midst of power and wealth, some things, like the strength of a person underestimated, could illuminate a room more brightly than any chandelier ever could. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Emily Collins. The restaurant buzzed softly around them, conversations blending with the clinking of glasses and faint strains of a piano playing somewhere in the distance. Richard attempted to re-establish the rhythm of the evening, offering Sophia a polite smile, but his gaze continually returned to Emily, who was seated across the room, quietly reviewing the menu with her elegant composure. There was an undeniable presence about her, a calm authority that contrasted sharply with the opulent but tense energy surrounding Richard and Sophia. As the waiter approached to take their orders, Richard found himself struggling to speak naturally, the words sticking in his throat as he realized that Emily's quiet confidence held more weight than any title or fortune he could claim. Emily looked up briefly, meeting his eyes with a clarity that seemed to cut through the layers of his self-assurance, and for a moment, the room felt suspended, a delicate balance between past and present, between what had been lost and what remained unspoken. Sophia noticed the subtle shift and leaned slightly closer, her curiosity piqued by the unspoken dialogue that hung between the two former spouses, sensing an intensity she could not yet comprehend. Richard cleared his throat, attempting a light comment about the new seasonal menu, trying to anchor himself in the normalcy of the evening, but Emily responded with a simple, poised nod, a gesture that carried both acknowledgement and quiet command. The waiter receded, leaving a brief silence filled with the soft hum of the restaurant, and Richard felt the pressure of expectation, realizing that Emily had not changed her strategy to compete or provoke, she had simply evolved beyond the need for confrontation. As he observed her, he remembered the countless hours she had spent managing both career and home, the subtle ways she had demonstrated resilience and intelligence, skills that he had taken for granted in the past. Each memory was sharp, tinged with a mix of regret and awe, as he now recognized that her presence in the room demanded respect not because of what she once was to him, but because of who she had become on her own terms. Sophia adjusted her posture, sensing the undercurrent of tension and reflection in Richard, and quietly smiled, impressed by the dignified manner in which Emily navigated the space, a silent demonstration of strength that transcended any superficial display of wealth or influence. Emily's eyes briefly met Richard's once more, a spark of recognition and calm determination reflected in their shared history, and in that fleeting moment, Richard became acutely aware of how little he understood the full depth of her character before, and how much of his own ego had blinded him. He reached for his water glass, swirling the clear liquid, trying to find equilibrium within himself, to reconcile the mixture of nostalgia, admiration, and the subtle sting of humility, and as he did so, the restaurant lights reflected off the surface, catching in his eyes the flicker of an unspoken understanding that tonight would unfold differently than he had anticipated, that Emily's quiet fortitude would shape the evening's course in ways he could not yet fully grasp, and the hum of the room around them seemed to fade, leaving only the intricate dance of acknowledgement and introspection between past and present, wealth and character, perception and reality, as Emily remained seated, serene, the center of an invisible gravity that commanded attention without demand, and Richard, for the first time in a long time, felt the weight of having underestimated someone whose strength did not need to announce itself loudly to be profoundly evident. Emily glanced around the restaurant, her eyes briefly catching the glint of the chandeliers as if measuring the room for unseen energy, noting how Richard and Sophia were settled into their table, their conversation polite but slightly strained, the kind of tension that lingered when history had left an imprint deeper than words. Richard attempted to steer the dialogue toward trivial matters, commenting on the cityscape visible through the tall windows, pointing out the illuminated skyline stretching into the night, yet Emily's presence drew the room's attention without any effort on her part, a quiet magnetism that commanded recognition. Sophia adjusted her posture, tilting her head slightly, curiosity mingling with admiration as she observed Emily's composed gestures and calm expression, a presence so assured that it seemed to fill every corner without dominating it, like sunlight diffusing gently across a room. Richard found himself measuring each word, noting the subtle shifts in Emily's demeanor, the slight lift of her chin, the serene focus in her gaze, realizing how much of his perception of her had been shaped by pride and the convenience of past assumptions, and now every glance, every nuance suggested she was operating in a space entirely her own, independent of his influence or approval. Emily slowly placed the menu down, her hands steady, fingers lightly resting on the tablecloth, and spoke with measured confidence. Discussing a new initiative at her company, a project she had led successfully, detailing the scope and potential impact with clarity and precision, capturing the subtle attention of a nearby patron who glanced over, intrigued by her articulate explanation. Richard's brow furrowed slightly as he listened, the realization settling in that Emily's accomplishments were not a reflection of him, but a testament to her intelligence, her persistence, her ability to thrive under circumstances he had underestimated. Sophia leaned in, nodding subtly, impressed by the way Emily conveyed information, the efficiency and poise that marked a person who had navigated challenges without need for validation from those around her, and Richard could not help but feel a pang of respect mixed with the quiet sting of humility, his own self-assuredness juxtaposed against her effortless competence. The waiter returned, presenting a selection of carefully paired wines, and Emily received the recommendation with grace, asking thoughtful questions about flavors and origins, demonstrating a knowledge that combined refinement with grounded awareness, all without a hint of pretension, and Richard watched, captivated by the balance of sophistication and authenticity. Traits he had long overlooked in his attempts to assert dominance or control. The city lights outside cast long reflections across the polished surface of the table, interplaying with the subtle glow from the chandeliers, creating a scene where past and present, wealth and personal achievement, authority and character, all coexisted in delicate equilibrium, and Richard felt the weight of having misjudged the person sitting before him, the ex-wife who carried herself with dignity and quiet power. Emily's expression softened for a moment as she glanced toward Richard, a small, genuine smile that neither sought to forgive nor provoke, simply acknowledging shared history and current reality, and Richard realized that the strength she radiated required no announcement, no gesture to command attention, yet it filled the space completely, leaving him to confront the reality that admiration, respect, and acknowledgement were earned, not inherited, and that evening, the dynamics of power, influence, and human presence were being rewritten subtly, quietly, yet irrevocably, within the glow of the restaurant, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond, and in that luminous, suspended moment, Richard understood that true strength had little to do with wealth and everything to do with character, poise, and the quiet command of one's own life. The soft glow of candlelight reflected in the crystal glasses as Emily reached for her water, her movements deliberate yet effortless, each gesture radiating calm confidence that seemed to contrast with the bustling activity around her. Richard watched closely, noticing the subtle way she listened, leaning slightly forward, absorbing every detail of conversation from other tables, as though each interaction carried a lesson she could gently extract without intrusion. Sophia sipped her wine, eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, sensing that Emily's presence carried an unspoken authority that did not rely on wealth or social standing, but on experience, intellect, and grace. The waiter returned to present the first course, an artfully plated dish that glimmered under the warm lighting, and Emily offered a simple but sincere comment to him, asking a thoughtful question about ingredients, a question that displayed knowledge yet did not intimidate, only invited respect. Richard felt a subtle shift within himself, a quiet acknowledgement that he had underestimated the depth of Emily's capability, that she had developed a strength and wisdom that was fully independent of their shared past. The conversation at their table continued, polite and casual, yet Richard's mind wandered, tracing back to memories of long nights managing deadlines, navigating complex negotiations, and balancing professional and personal responsibilities, moments in which Emily had shown resilience and intelligence that he had often dismissed or overlooked. Each recollection painted her in a light that was no longer tinted by familiarity or residual assumptions, but with clarity and respect for her present self. Sophia adjusted her posture slightly, leaning in to better observe. Sensing that this was more than a social dinner, it was a subtle demonstration of character, an unspoken display of competence and poise that could not be ignored. Emily's eyes occasionally met Richard's, not with accusation or challenge, but with a gentle awareness, a reminder that she had been shaped by experience and choice, and that she existed fully in her own right, unaffected by his ego or the circumstances he had once thought defined her. The ambient music played softly, blending with the hum of other diners and the occasional clatter of silverware, creating a backdrop that made every gesture, glance, and word between the three of them feel amplified, charged with layers of meaning that only attentive observation could capture. As Emily spoke about a recent accomplishment at work, detailing strategies she had implemented to improve efficiency and outcomes, her voice carried a balance of authority and approachability that drew subtle attention from nearby patrons, not because she sought admiration, but because competence has a way of being recognized naturally. Richard could not help but feel a swell of admiration tempered by humility, a recognition that real influence came not from titles or wealth alone, but from the consistent, thoughtful application of skill and character. Sophia quietly noted this dynamic, feeling a renewed sense of respect for Emily and a deeper understanding of the unspoken bond between people who have navigated challenges with integrity. The lights from the cityscape outside flickered across the table as the evening progressed, painting reflections that intertwined with the soft glow of the restaurant, and within this interplay of light and presence, Richard slowly began to understand that the true measure of a person's strength is revealed not in the spotlight, but in the quiet, composed confidence with which they carry themselves, a lesson Emily embodied effortlessly, silently reshaping the perspective of everyone at the table, leaving Richard to grapple with admiration, respect, and the subtle, undeniable truth that the evening had become a study in grace, resilience, and the power of self-possession. The soft clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversations filled the restaurant as Emily leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed yet purposeful, embodying a poise that made the entire table feel centered around her calm presence. Richard found himself observing the subtle interactions she navigated, the way she nodded in acknowledgement to the server and glanced toward other patrons with quiet awareness, not seeking attention, yet naturally commanding it. Sophia watched as well, curiosity and admiration mingling in her expression, sensing that Emily's quiet strength and measured confidence spoke louder than any display of wealth or status could. Emily engaged in conversation with a neighboring table about a recent charity initiative she had been leading, her voice warm and confident, effortlessly articulating the impact of the project while maintaining a genuine tone that drew interest without arrogance. Richard felt a mix of surprise and respect, recognizing that her influence came not from titles or power, but from the combination of intelligence, empathy, and skillful execution. The soft glow from the chandeliers reflected off the glassware, creating a mosaic of light across the table, and Richard could not help but notice how every small gesture Emily made seemed intentional, each movement precise yet natural, demonstrating mastery of presence that he had underestimated before. Sophia leaned in slightly, her eyes following Emily's subtle interactions, impressed by the way she balanced authority with approachability, seeing firsthand the quiet effectiveness of a person who commanded respect without needing to assert dominance. Richard adjusted his posture, swallowing past pride, and allowed himself to fully acknowledge the depth of Emily's accomplishments, the strategic thinking, and calm decisiveness that had carried her to a place of clear competence and undeniable presence. Emily took a sip of her water, a small but deliberate pause that allowed the energy at the table to settle, and then shared a story about a challenge she had faced at work, detailing how she approached it thoughtfully, highlighting teamwork and ethical decision-making, making it clear that success was not merely personal but collective, a lesson in leadership and integrity that subtly resonated across the room. Richard's attention sharpened, recognizing that this was not an attempt to impress or outshine him, but a natural extension of who she was, a demonstration of capability and moral strength in action. Sophia nodded quietly, acknowledging the depth of character Emily exhibited, a presence that carried far beyond the superficial markers of wealth or influence, and Richard realized that this evening, the dynamics of their interactions were no longer about control or judgment, but about witnessing the quiet assertion of true value, the kind that could not be fabricated or borrowed. Outside, the city lights flickered on the wet streets, reflecting across the large windows, creating a scene of serene brilliance, and inside, the interplay of candlelight and chandelier glow painted every expression, every gesture, with a sense of significance that lingered unspoken. Richard felt a humbling clarity settle within him, understanding that Emily's presence had shifted the room in subtle but unmistakable ways, teaching lessons in patience, composure, and the undeniable force of character that spoke without words. The conversation continued, now flowing more naturally, yet every sentence, every glance carried layers of meaning, a dance of acknowledgement, reflection, and newfound respect, and Richard understood that the true measure of influence and strength was not in titles, wealth, or previous judgments, but in the ability to navigate life with quiet confidence, intellect, and the grace to command recognition without demanding it. And as the night deepened, he watched Emily move through the space with effortless elegance, each action reinforcing the lesson that had been quietly unfolding all evening, that real power, dignity, and respect are earned through character, presence, and unwavering integrity. Emily set down her fork after tasting the delicately seasoned dish, her expression calm and reflective, as if weighing not only the flavors but the nuances of the conversation unfolding around her. Richard watched her closely, noting the way she seemed to occupy the space without forcing it, each movement measured yet natural, conveying confidence and composure that he had long failed to appreciate. Sophia glanced at Emily, sensing the subtle authority in her demeanor, an influence that did not rely on voice or presence alone but radiated quietly from the assurance of her actions and words. Emily spoke then, softly but with precision, explaining a recent strategic decision she had made at her company, outlining the rationale and expected outcomes with clarity that drew both admiration and respect from those within earshot. Richard felt a mixture of awe and humility, recognizing that the ex-wife he had once underestimated possessed an intellect and determination that transcended circumstance or prior perception. Outside, the city lights reflected in the windows, casting long, gentle streaks across the polished table, framing the scene in a subtle interplay of light and shadow that mirrored the evolving dynamics of the evening. Emily's gestures remained composed, each one deliberate yet seemingly effortless, illustrating a mastery of presence that commanded attention without needing to assert dominance. Sophia shifted slightly, leaning forward, absorbing the quiet lesson of poise and competence, understanding in real time how Emily's understated strength shaped the energy of the entire room. Richard adjusted in his seat, swallowing past pride, and allowed himself to fully register the realization that true influence was not derived from wealth, title, or appearances, but from integrity, intelligence, and the ability to navigate life with steady confidence. Emily's eyes briefly met his, a glance of acknowledgement and calm awareness that neither demanded apology nor provoked confrontation, yet communicated volumes about her self-assured position in the present moment. The soft hum of the restaurant, the distant clink of glass, and the gentle lighting created a sense of suspended time, where each movement and word carried significance beyond the ordinary. Richard reflected inwardly, recognizing that the evening had shifted, that the balance of power he had assumed was no longer dictated by his status alone, but by Emily's composed assertion of her own capabilities. Sophia observed this subtle shift, feeling a mix of admiration and contemplation, aware that the quiet demonstration of character was a lesson in itself, one that redefined the dynamics of respect, recognition, and understanding. Emily remained poised, serene, and entirely grounded in herself, allowing the room to absorb her presence without forcing it, and in that calm, Richard realized that the most profound strength often went unseen until it was met with genuine attention, a revelation that quietly transformed his perspective as the evening moved forward in its delicate, deliberate rhythm. The evening had settled into a rhythm of quiet sophistication, the ambient lighting casting a warm glow across the polished surfaces and reflecting softly in the glasses on the table. Emily engaged in a thoughtful conversation with Sophia, discussing subtle details of her professional achievements, the strategic decisions she had implemented, and the people she had inspired along the way, all conveyed with clarity, intelligence, and a natural warmth that made the words resonate beyond mere information. Richard listened, captivated by the effortless way Emily commanded attention, not through volume or assertion, but through composure, insight, and a presence that spoke louder than any boast or display could. Sophia nodded occasionally, her interest genuine, observing the seamless balance Emily maintained between confidence and approachability, recognizing a rare blend of skill and character that transformed ordinary dialogue into a subtle lesson in leadership and integrity. The waiter moved gracefully among the tables, delivering dishes and attending to the subtle needs of diners, yet even the flow of service seemed to highlight Emily's ability to remain present, fully engaged, and perceptive, drawing subtle admiration from those who noticed the quiet authority in her demeanor. Richard felt a growing awareness of how much he had underestimated her, recalling the times in their past together when her strengths had been overshadowed in his mind by assumptions and ego, and now, with the clarity of distance and experience, he could see the depth, the intelligence, and the calm determination that defined her current presence. The city lights outside shimmered through the tall windows, creating reflections that intermingled with the warm glow inside, a scene that mirrored the interplay of past and present, personal achievement, and mutual recognition unfolding at the table. Emily shared a recent success story, her tone measured, illustrating how she had navigated complex decisions with ethical consideration and practical efficiency, highlighting teamwork and foresight in a manner that was inspiring yet entirely understated. Richard felt a subtle shift within himself, a combination of admiration, humility, and an acute understanding that influence and respect were earned through consistent character and thoughtful action rather than status or wealth alone. Sophia's eyes followed the exchange, intrigued and impressed, noting the way Emily's presence seemed to elevate the space around her, making interactions more meaningful and attention more focused, a testament to quiet confidence and authentic leadership. The soft hum of conversation, the occasional clink of silverware, and the gentle strains of background music created a delicate backdrop where every word, glance, and gesture carried amplified significance, allowing Richard to reflect on the true nature of respect and recognition. Emily's serene expression and measured tone reinforced the sense that she was entirely grounded, fully capable of navigating the room and the evening with poise, demonstrating the power of composure and the quiet force of personal integrity. Richard adjusted his posture, absorbing the subtle lessons being conveyed without direct confrontation, recognizing that the evening had become an unexpected reflection on character, the invisible strength of a person underestimated, and the enduring impact of dignity, resilience, and self-assurance, as Emily's quiet mastery of presence shaped the experience, leaving an indelible impression on everyone present at the table and shifting the perception of what true influence and accomplishment looked like in the subtle, powerful glow of the restaurant. The final course was served, a delicate composition of seasonal ingredients, and Emily handled the plate with the same careful attention she applied to every detail of her life, savoring the moment with quiet appreciation. Richard observed her, noting the subtle ways she interacted with the waiter, her questions thoughtful and precise, demonstrating both knowledge and consideration that drew an almost imperceptible admiration from the surrounding diners. Sophia smiled gently, sensing the depth of Emily's presence, the effortless way she commanded respect without needing to assert herself, a balance of confidence and humility that made her influence felt in the room without a word of demand. Emily shared a story about a new initiative she had spearheaded at her company, detailing the planning, execution, and impact, highlighting the value of teamwork, ethical decisions, and clear communication, all delivered with a calm authority that made the narrative compelling without exaggeration. Richard felt a mix of awe and introspection, realizing that Emily's strength and capability were entirely her own, independent of him, of their past, and of any external validation, a realization that gently unsettled his previous notions of control and dominance. The ambient lighting reflected softly across the table, casting warm tones on the faces of the three of them, and the city lights outside added a subtle sparkle, creating an atmosphere of serene clarity and reflection. Emily's demeanor remained composed, her movements deliberate but natural, the ease with which she navigated the social environment demonstrating a mastery of presence and self-assurance that quietly commanded respect. Richard found himself reflecting on the lessons embedded in her conduct, understanding that influence and admiration were earned through consistency, integrity, and thoughtful action rather than status or wealth. Sophia's eyes followed Emily's gestures, attentive and appreciative, recognizing that the unspoken power of character could shape the perception of others more profoundly than overt displays of authority ever could. The evening wound down, yet the impression left by Emily's poise, competence, and understated strength lingered, subtly shifting the energy at the table, and Richard could not help but feel a mixture of respect, humility, and a dawning awareness of how much he had underestimated her capabilities. Emily smiled softly, not for validation but as a gentle acknowledgement of shared understanding, a quiet affirmation of her own journey and growth, and in that calm, composed presence, both Richard and Sophia absorbed the true impact of dignity, perseverance, and understated mastery, realizing that the most lasting influence comes not from wealth or titles, but from character, integrity, and the quiet power of someone who has learned to carry themselves with unwavering confidence and grace. As the restaurant lights dimmed slightly for the night, the city skyline twinkled beyond the windows, reflecting the subtle, transformative effect of the evening, leaving Richard with a newfound respect, Sophia with a deepened admiration, and Emily with the serene satisfaction of a life lived with purpose, integrity, and quiet, undeniable strength. The evening was winding down, the warm glow of the chandeliers reflecting softly across the polished table, casting a serene light that seemed to settle the energy in the room. Emily sat back, a subtle smile on her face, her posture relaxed yet purposeful, embodying a sense of accomplishment and quiet confidence that had subtly shifted the dynamics of the evening. Richard observed her, the earlier tension and unease replaced by a deep respect, an acknowledgement of the strength, intelligence, and composure she carried effortlessly, qualities that no title or wealth could create but only recognize. Sophia, seated beside him, nodded slightly, her expression one of admiration and contemplation, having witnessed firsthand the understated power of character and integrity at work in the space around them. Emily spoke briefly, her words measured and calm, highlighting the lessons learned from her own journey, the importance of patience, consistency, and maintaining poise under pressure, conveying a sense of wisdom earned through experience rather than assertion. Richard felt a humbling clarity, realizing that the evening had been a quiet demonstration of true influence, one that operated through competence, dignity, and authenticity rather than any external markers of success. The ambient sounds of the restaurant, soft conversations, and the gentle clink of cutlery created a backdrop that made each gesture and glance carry amplified meaning, reinforcing the subtle lessons being imparted without direct confrontation. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the windows, mirroring the reflections of the room, and the interplay of light and presence framed a scene where respect and recognition were quietly earned through character and grace. Emily's calm demeanor and thoughtful engagement left a lasting impression, showing that resilience, intelligence, and integrity could command attention and admiration more profoundly than any display of status or power. Richard adjusted in his seat, absorbing the lessons silently, the realization settling that underestimating someone based on past impressions or superficial judgments was a misstep that could only be corrected through observation, reflection, and acknowledgement of the individual's true capabilities. Sophia leaned slightly closer, attentive to the nuanced interactions, understanding the impact of Emily's presence on both Richard and the environment around them, and appreciating the quiet demonstration of strength and competence that spoke volumes without words. As the night drew toward its end, Emily remained composed and centered, her serene presence leaving a tangible sense of respect and admiration lingering in the air. Richard found himself contemplating not only the evening but the broader understanding of influence and character, recognizing that the most enduring power comes not from wealth or titles but from the integrity, poise, and quiet confidence that define a person's true presence. In the glow of the restaurant lights and the shimmering cityscape beyond, the lesson of the evening crystallized: dignity, resilience, and the quiet mastery of oneself leave the most profound and lasting impact, a truth that both Richard and Sophia carried with them as they absorbed the full measure of Emily's undeniable strength and grace.